I wish to make certain elaborate, discussion on the theories of Foucault. For Foucault, all statements belong to a particular discourse. Whatever be the statements, they belong to a particular discourse, which is set at all possible statements that can be articulated about a particular topic at a particular historical period. This I explained already. Any statements that are generated by a group of people, a community, at a given historical period or time is a discourse. It's not a debate, it's not an argument, but it is a recurring, circulating statements about something, anything. It can be about gender, it can be about religion, it can be about environment, it can be about gender, sex, violence, whatever be the matter that is discussed. So discourse in that sense, definitely defines the boundaries of the surroundings about which these discourses say something or do not say something. Discourses sometimes say something about the surroundings, or sometimes the discourses, close their eyes towards these surroundings. But here Foucault's work, as I told you already, are principally, chiefly concerned with conditions of possibility. Again, archaeology is used in order to understand the conditions of possibility, in order to look at certain statements gaining ascendancy, gaining prominence or ascendancy. In what way certain statements gain prominence or ascendancy, that depends on the relative power dynamics of the people who are making these statements. In a class, the class teacher holds that. In a university, the vice chancellor holds that. In a nation, the judiciary holds that, or the parliamentary authorities holds that. So it varies from institution to institution. But when Foucault talks about this kind of power creation in different regions, Foucault says that it is not a centralized form of power, it is everywhere. So that is why Foucault argues about diffused power systems. Diffused. There is a diffusion of power. There is not centralization of power. Because you can see the control mechanism or disciplinary mechanisms in a nation, in a university, and also at your home. You can feel that particular disciplinary mechanism inside this auditorium. No doubt about that. So, Foucault's theory of discourses surrounds around this concept of power in two terms. One is characterized as normalizing power. We are all sitting here. We are behaving in a particular manner, and you are not conscious about the manner in which you are controlled. But while you are jailed in the prison, while you are imprisoned, you are very, very conscious about the way in which you are regulated. So Foucault is more concerned about this kind of a power. Which kind of a power? This normalizing power. That is, your thoughts and your desires and your understanding is controlled without even you understanding that these things are controlled and regulated. This is normalizing power. You think that this is very normal. The slaves used to imagine that they are slaves because they are slaves and they have no right to question the master. Right. So what is happening inside a theater also, I told you, while you watch a film, it also leads to a normalization of your consciousness. You think that yes, it is like that. For the time being, you think that. That's why I already commented that it is a neurotic, hysteric spectator. A hysteric and neurotic spectator inside the cinema hall. So what Foucault talks about is that For Foucault, a knowledge is not a thing. It is not a thing. It is not a fact. But a knowledge is rather a relation between statements within a particular discourse. So knowledge is relational dynamics. Knowledge is not like this mouse sitting here. It is a mouse. You can see the mouse. It is not like that. The knowledge comprises of my use of this mouse and in what way I skip certain slides according to my convenience, and in what way I display certain, slides before you. There is a relation between the technology, me as an instructor or a speaker, and you as people who watch me. This is relational dynamics. So knowledge is like, every knowledge is like that. So that's why Foucault commented about knowledge only as perspectives. He said that, there are no histories, only perspectival histories. Everything is determined by perspective. You can call this as a perspective, you can call that as a perspective. So there are various perspectives, and perspectives revolve around a subject or a problem which generate the discourses. Right. So Foucault, according to Foucault, the specific relation between statements within a particular discourse produce a kind of knowledge. That particular discourse itself is a kind of knowledge, the way in which that particular discourse is circulated in the society. And you can see that Foucault's major works revolve around this application of this discourse and archaeological method, how the archaeological method was used by Foucault in order to understand the hidden truths or nature of these discourses. Foucault's first work, which was published in the year 1966, is doctoral dissertation, Madness and Civilization. Vibhrantiyum Samskaravum, if you translate that. Madness എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നമ്മൾ ഉടനെ അത് കിറുക്ക് വട്ട് അങ്ങനെ മാത്രം എടുക്കരുത്. It's a vibhranti, the change in the mindset of the people, madness. That's why I talked about madness inside the cinema hall. In cinema hall, the people become mad. Doesn't mean that they need to be chained or imprisoned, or they are to be put into an asylum. It is not like that. So Madness in Civilization, for example, he analyzes the discourse of madness vis-a-vis various historical institutions. Madness is out there. You cannot just consider madness as there, but madness is defined and certain statements are made about the madness based on the workhouses, the hospitals, the asylums, and also based on the development of a discipline which is called psychiatry. How psychiatry developed and how psychiatry looked at madness. Certain bodies are segregated like that, That is why the leper houses were, transformed later as asylums. That's very common knowledge for you. So this comprises, that is, these workhouses, the hospital and the asylum, the work of the doctors, the work of the people who, always scrutinize the behavior of these people. All these constitute certain discursive practices. That is, discursive practices, discursive traditions, So many discourses on madness are produced and created through these discursive traditions. For example, our understanding about NEP and higher education is, actually it makes certain discourses, certain statements, but these discourses are circulated at various points, Students talk about that, teachers talk about that, people talk about that, educational experts talk about that. So it is circulated. It is there. So that kind of, a movement, a slippery movement of some statements about a particular thing is happening around us, So no text, no utterance is unique or objective, because those utterances are to be related with other utterances which are happening in the society. So when we use this archaeology of Foucault, the episteme of Foucault, discourse of Foucault, from the standpoint epistemology of Foucault, from a Foucauldian perspective, a cinema is both a discursive and also a non-discursive formation. A discursive formation in the sense that the cinema, usually the cinema industry is controlling the production of cinema, right? And the cinema is again, modulated and remodulated by stardom. Stardom is also part of cinema. Okay? Do you feel stardom when you go to the theater? Definitely you feel the stardom, You have all the cutouts and you have all the fans crying this and that way, making all the noises in that sense, So, such a kind of discursive formations, a mode of knowledge is manifested concretely at the level of individual films, and a mode of power manifested concretely at the level of film industry. So that is the power of the film and power of the industry. It is reciprocal. You cannot understand the meaning of a film. You cannot understand the story of a film. You cannot understand the nature of, certain character display in the film. Certain stars acting as Parshiraja or, as, Velayuda Chegavar and told, you will not be able to understand that unless and until you understand the reciprocal relational dynamics of power between the individual film and the film industry. Because film industry is a factory, Film industry is a factory which is decided by capital, which is decided by interest of the star, which is decided by the interest of box office, by the theaters, by the release people and all. So what Foucault says is here that the reciprocal relation between films and the film industry in its turn, finally produces a particular form of art piece, which is very subjective. And the same particular film and also the film industry in turn creates the viewer and the spectator. So the viewer and the spectator is also not a person with an individual domain who is very autonomous like that, The spectator is also created by the film industry and the kind of films which are, exhibited all over the region. So Foucault would claim that the relation between films and spectators, it is neither wholly passive and nor wholly active, It slips in that sense. It moves. It is very transitional in that sense. The moods of the spectators vary. If you look at, the way in which a film is appreciated by people in Tamil Nadu, that need not be the same moods and mindset of the people in Kerala, right? There is a change in that sense. So the locational specificity of the spectator is also very important. The locational specificity of the spectator is deeply constructed by certain factors which go beyond individual tastes or even cinema industry's taste, On the whole, the cinema industry has certain traits. But when you look at a film, how Parashiraja is appreciated by people in Malayalam, right? And that is not the way in which Parashiraja is appreciated by the people in Tamil Nadu. For example, even in utterances and dialogue deliveries, these kind of films, vary in their presentation, because you call somebody, you call your mother. When you call your mother, the character is calling the mother as Amme in Malayalam. The way in which the Tamilian call as Amma, So it's a profundity is there, Because that particular effect is transmitted through this dialogue delivery. So that's why I say that the cinematic spectator at a different location may carry a different kind of, affiliation with the film, may carry a different kind of psychological attitude towards the film. So the neurotic and the hysteric spectator differs from one region to other region. There is also it is not stable. It is very reciprocal. It is very fluidic. Maybe you can connect that with, the theories of liquid modernity of Sigmund Bauman. Okay, right. So, as the history of cinema makes plain, there is also a way to understand the power of capitalism that is connected to the history of cinema. Right. On the one hand, Western capitalism that gave rise to industry technology, the market economy, the tripartite class system, etc., all of which, are conditions of possibility of the emergence of cinema. So cinema is never an art form which is completely free from the interests of the capital. So these are also some of the factors which form as constituent parts in analyzing and dissecting a particular film, because the cinema industry, after all, is a manifestation. It very well reflects the power of the capital. So along with the expansion of capitalism, you can also see the expansion of the cinema industry. You just think about the theatres which were in Kerala in the 1960s and 70s. Sometimes, those theatres displayed the characteristic of the Indian caste system, right? There were people to sit on the floors, muddy floors, then benches were there, two kinds of chairs. One kind of chair is the Ashoka chair, then the steel chair. Then there was a particular category which is called the reserved category. From where the reserved come, the reserved only for those people who are, affiliated with a higher caste in that sense. So the ecologies of architecture of the cinema, the architectural ecologies of the cinema halls also display this character of changes in the capital formation and changes in the theatre design. So along as, now you go to any theatre in Ernakulam, you can sit with anybody if you have money. Now theatre's experience also changes in that sense, 4K Atmos or Dolby sound systems and everything, changes the experiential level of the viewer, the spectator inside the cinema hall. So that is why I say that a film, individual cinema, and also a film industry is also created. It will have its manifestations of a capitalist industry in that sense, It's a growth in that sense. It's not just a pure art form, or it is not neutral. This is the idea of Foucault. A cinema cannot be considered a pure art form, very objectively stating this and that, and very compassionate to the historical figures, wanted to emotionalize with the people who were, affected by Jallianwala Bagh, recently cinema on Jallianwala Bagh, or Udham Singh, A cinema is also political in that sense. So the construction of a cinema, from the very beginning of the idea about the cinema, the story of the cinema, the creation of the script and the presentation of the actors and all, revolves around the whims and fancies of an industry which is decided by forms of capital and structures of power. This is the particular reciprocal relational dynamics of power. So you just cannot understand a cinema. It's the work of, M.D. Vasudevan Nair, well crafted and directed by Hariharan. So it is like that. It's not like that, because they are also subjected to the interest of the film industry, because, they also will have to heed to the advice of Gokulam Gopalan. No doubt about that. So when you craft a cinema that is 19th നൂറ്റാണ്ട്, and the 19th നൂറ്റാണ്ട് cinema is not just the characteristic kind of, an objective kind of visualization of the past. No, but cinema proceeds from this stage. At a particular point of time, the cinema escapes from all these kind of, rigid, structured capital confinements and all, sometimes. Just imagine, how many of you have seen 19th നൂറ്റാണ്ട്? I'm not sure about that. How many of you have seen 19th നൂറ്റാണ്ട്? Okay, right. Only very few. Oh my God, this is very, very upsetting and, shocking things for me, Okay, right. In 19th നൂറ്റാണ്ട്, there is a song. സിനിമ കണ്ട ആൾക്കാർക്ക് അറിയാമായിരിക്കും അല്ലേ? അതിൻ്റെ അതുണ്ട്, കറുമ്പൻ ഇന്നിങ്ങ് വരുമോ കാറേ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് നങ്ങേലി ആയിട്ട് അഭിനയിക്കുന്ന പെൺകുട്ടി ഇങ്ങനെ പാടി നടക്കുന്ന ഒരു സീനുണ്ട് അല്ലേ? 3 മിനിറ്റ് എന്തോ ആണ് ഈ സിനിമയുടെ ആ പാട്ടിൻ്റെ ദൈർഘ്യം. 3 മിനിറ്റ് 56 സെക്കൻഡോ അങ്ങനെ എന്തോ ആണ്. സത്യത്തിൽ അങ്ങനൊരു നങ്ങേലി അങ്ങനെ അന്ന് ഈ കൊടുത്ത ഒരു നിറമുള്ള പുടവയും ഒക്കെ കൊടുത്തിട്ട് അങ്ങനെ ഒരു പാട്ടുപാടി നടന്ന് കാണുമോ എന്നൊരു സംശയം നമുക്കുണ്ടാകുകയാണെന്ന് വിചാരിക്കുക. ചരിത്രകാരൻ്റെ എല്ലാ ഒബ്ജക്റ്റിവിറ്റിയും തെറ്റി, ചരിത്രം തെറ്റിപ്പോയി. സിനിമയ്ക്ക് എൻ്റയർലി വേറൊരു ടെറൈനാണ് സിനിമ പറയുന്നത്. But when you use the Foucauldian theory of archaeology, the methodology of archaeology, you will be able to understand that cinema for 3 minutes or 3 minutes and 52 seconds develops a plot in the 19th century. It's a kind of critical imagination with the past. തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും അന്ന് അതുപോലെ ചിന്തിച്ച ഒത്തിരി പെൺകുട്ടികൾ ആ വർഗത്തിലുണ്ടല്ലോ. അധസ്ഥിത വർഗം എന്ന് നമ്മൾ പറയുന്ന വർഗത്തിലെ ഒത്തിരി പെൺകുട്ടികൾ ഇതുപോലെ ചിന്തിച്ച് കാണും. നല്ല നിറമുള്ള നല്ല ഡ്രസ്സിട്ട് നടക്കാനായിട്ട് ആഗ്രഹമുള്ള എത്രയോ പെൺകുട്ടികൾ കാണും അല്ലേ? സ്പെസിഫിക് ആയിട്ട് അങ്ങനെ ഒരു ഡാൻസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടോ എന്നോ അങ്ങനെ ഒരു പ്രണയം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നോ എന്നും സിനിമയ്ക്ക് പറയാൻ പറ്റില്ല. പക്ഷേ സിനിമ എന്താണ് കാണിക്കുന്നത്? സിനിമ ഒരു വാശിയായിട്ട് സിനിമ ഒന്ന് റീകാസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യുകയാണ്. എന്ത്? ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു പ്ലോട്ടിനെ സിനിമ റീകാസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്ത് വെക്കുകയാണ്. So this is called a true invention in cinema. We may think that, people belonging very much attached to positivist theories may think that, oh, this is very bad representation. What is the evidence for that? If you ask for evidence, there is no evidence like that. But according to Robert Rosenstern, a postmodern film historian, who is the prophet of these historical films, the director of the film can take certain inventions which are called true inventions. True invention means, listen, there is a central plot of history, that is 19th century, untouchability is there, some bodies are segregated, so much of oppression is happening on that, torturing of the body is happening. Can anyone of you contradict with that? Yes, 19th century definitely had this kind of torturing of the body, exclusion, untouchability. You cannot be visible for some time. You can go there. You have to go elsewhere. ചരിത്രകാരന്മാർ അന്ന് ഒത്തിരി മുള്ളും ഒക്കെ കാലിൽ കൊണ്ട് കാണുമെന്ന് പാവങ്ങൾ നടന്നു പോയി. ഇപ്പം കാര്യം റോഡിൽ കൂടെ അല്ല നടക്കുന്നത്, റോഡിൽ നിന്ന് മാറി നടക്കുമ്പോൾ ഒത്തിരി മുള്ളൊക്കെ അവരുടെ കാലിൽ കൊണ്ട് കാണുമെന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. അങ്ങനെ നടന്ന ഒത്തിരി ആൾക്കാരുണ്ട്. സോ ദി സെൻട്രാലിറ്റി ഓഫ് ദ പ്ലോട്ട് ഇസ് ദെയർ. So at that particular maintaining and strictly adhering to the centrality of the plot, the filmmaker makes an invention. That invention is true invention. So that is justified in filmic history, filmic representation. But opposite to that, there is a false intervention. False invention. Can you cite an example for a false invention? You just look at the film which was dubbed as historical film, Kayangulam Kochunni, and Kochunni fighting against the East India Company. Totally, you cannot imagine such a plot in that sense. So that is a false invention. Cinema goes beyond every kind of historical reasoning and even imagination. So such a kind of reenactment is considered to be baseless, even according to the theories of the postmodernists. So while cinema, without leaving the central plot, without leaving the core issue of untouchability and torture of the body, cinema invented the imaginative plot of a girl singing with, wearing new clothes and dresses. That is called a true invention in cinema, which should have been there as a feeling and sensibility, as a dream of the 19th century. So the dream of people, the dream of that poor girl is recasted by cinema. അവിടെയാണ് ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞത് എന്താണ്? Cinema defrosts the past. Through cinematic imagination, the past is defrosted in that sense. That's what Foucault says about that. Foucault says that the past is frozen. The past is frozen, but the real past in that present is not frozen. There are so many stories about Nangeri, there are so many stories about Che Guevara, there are so many stories about Gandhi, about Nehru, about Palshi Raja. So those stories are taken and compressed in the textual narratives, factual narratives. You give the footnotes, you give the references, and you have all bibliography and all such things, and you claim that this is a very valid documentation of Gandhi, Nehru, or Nangili, or Veerai the Che Guevara. But in films, it's a very different mode of representation, reenactment, where you cannot give footnotes like the statutory warning, says about, smoking is injurious to your health. Can you say that, there is a diametrically opposite argument posited by the historian K.K. Kurup regarding Palshi Raja's death? You can't write like that. People will leave the cinema theatre. So, what is an important aspect that you have to understand is there, cinema closes the historical plot. Because the audience want to close the historical plot. If the historical plot is open, what happened to Palshi Raja? Was he poisoned? Was he a victim of the European, that means the company cruelty inside the forest? Like MGS once said that he was like a dog who was neglected by all the people in Wayanad. Only Kurichias took for him, gave shelter to him, like that. And was he shot by clay farm? Was he shot by Baber, the collector? Or another soldier? There are various perspectives about that. What cinema did? Cinema definitely chose or it selected the perspective that is very well established in colonial company records. He was shot by an officer, maybe Baber or Cleffa. And ultimately, when you read KKN Group's Padashi Samaragil, these two officers, they filed cases even to get compensation from the government. And 3 elephants of Padashi Raja were distributed to them as prizes. And 1 elephant was given to Kanara Menon, that particular role played by Jagadi. So you think, so if the cinema ends like, like this, imagine the cinema ends like this. In what way? There is an epilogue-like thing, a tail end. Now, since the document suggests diametrically opposite arguments regarding the death of Padashi Raja, we are not able to end the story. Then what will happen to that particular historical film? And the people will be dissatisfied and discontented, So cinema always wants to close that particular historical event by giving a decent end to that film. It should be definitely the victory of Padashi Raja. So now just imagine about the last scene in Padashi Raja. Padashi Raja was shot by the British officer. And you just think about the last shot, And the cinema always projects history like that. Cinema always reenacts history in order to impress, in order to add an emotive heuristic to the spectator. So a transformation within the spectator is to happen. That's why I said, the spectators need to undergo certain transformations of the mindset. So what happened there? Ultimately, towards the end, he was shot and he was, actually falling down, and then you can see that he was clinging to the sword, and, drops of blood were coming from him. What is the implication of that? What the cinema tried to point, what is the signification of that? That is, the filmmaker is, so much attached to Padashi Raja, right? The spectators are also so much attached to Padashi Raja, so they wanted to create or trigger the heroic element of Padashi Raja towards the end, because it is climax of cinema. A conclusion of a text or a thesis is not like the climax of cinema. You can definitely recapitulate and take all the points and condense that in the concluding chapter. Nobody is going to question you, isn't it? It can be open and it can be closed. So cinema, the cinematic imagination is to trigger heroism, and that heroism was triggered and well established by cinema and closes it as the story. There is no doubt about that. There should not be any certitude with the spectator. Spectator പിന്നെ ചിന്തിച്ച് KKN ഗ്രൂപ്പിൻ്റെ പുസ്തകമോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വില്യം ഡോഗിൻ്റെ മലബാർ മാനുവലോ പോയി വായിച്ചിട്ട് വേണോ ഇതിൻ്റെ എൻഡിങ് എങ്ങനെയാണെന്ന് മനസ്സിലാക്കാനായിട്ട്. There is no point. So, at the same time, the meaning is to be immediately communicated to the spectator. So, cinematic test is totally different. So, the positivist notions, what is my argument is that the positivist notions of history, which is very structured through the examination, verification and validation of any historical documents and evidences, and creation of a narrative based on these true facts, within quote, with all these referencing systems, the footnotes, endnotes and the bibliography, is a very different kind of narrative in history, right? So you cannot expect that historical narration in cinema, because cinema is basically a different mode of representation. It is a different kind of reenactment, a reenactment which is to make experiential learning, experiential viewing. Two types of things are happening inside the theater. One is experiential learning. Now NEP and all says about experiential learning, right? What is experiential learning? Inside the theater, you are learning about Padashi Raja and you are experiencing. Like Roland Barthes says, it's actually a cinematic plot. While you are in the theater, you are witnessing history again. You are witnessing history again. You are viewing history from the balcony. And with reference to Battleship Potemkin, with reference to Battleship Potemkin, the last scene of Battleship Potemkin, you should see that movie. Towards the end, some innocent people are shot by the army, and you can see that a lot of casualties are happening. So you are taken into the Odisha steppes where the people were dying. So that type of an imagine, taking back you to the valorous death of Parashiraja, taking back you to the 19th century, where your body is also experiencing this torture of the untouchables in the 19th century. When that kind of experience is reenacted, it creates a different kind of discourses of cinema, for which the archaeological method of Foucault is very essential for understanding the nature of cinematic representation. You can't simply say that this is very subjective and false statements regarding history. Objectivity is not there. It is not valid. It cannot be established by historical evidence. Now Foucault asks this question: what is the historical evidence that you have without any fictitious element in that? Are there any historical records and evidences without any fictitious element in that? So this is a very serious question one need to ask, Just to think about an Anish who studied in a college in 1970s or 1980s, okay? A very introvert fellow. And once during a strike, he threw a stone at the college building and one tile was broken. And the Anish became an Anish with a honorific OP, Odu Putticha Anish, okay, right? And then towards the end, a lot of records were crafted about Anish. The principal writing, the HOD writing, not Teresa Divya, definitely, okay, right? Then the commission of teachers are writing, the police is writing, a lot of court cases are coming, and ultimately the Anish is dubbed as a Maoist, right? And lot of records were piled upon Anish, right? Umpteen number of records, and archives is set apart for Anish, who was a very unassuming kind of character in those times, in the 1980s, and it was a Catholic church-run, managed college, so they portrayed Anish as a rebel, as a heretic even, right? He wanted to destroy Christian institutions, Catholic institutions, Kerala, right? A lot of factual evidences were created for Anish's stone throwing, a simple incident. After 60 years, an oral historian interviewed Anish, and now the story unfolds like this, that Anish is saying that I had a love towards a girl. So since he was very introvert, and the girl said that fellow is not brave, he is not having the guts to love me, things like that, then I decided, as per the advice of my friend, in order to throw a stone at the college office and then show my valor, courage. Then what is the sanctity and facticity of the records which are compiled, heaped on Anish? Are there any imagination of the documents written by the principal and the police officer? Whereas the person who secured first rank is only having one certificate. There are no records compiled, piled upon him. So this is a point in order to demonstrate that, according to postmodernism, I think you may be knowing that people in power, they have the power to structure language. They have the power to structure language, and that structuration of language also determines the kind of power, and that particular structuration of language also criminalizes people. And the people who are in power, who have the power to regulate the use of language, expresses or represents, a kind of argument or version as the truth. Whereas the truth is somewhere else. Truth is ambiguous. The truth is not there. Truth is fluiding. You are on a slippery ground. So most of the positivist historians are on a slippery ground. But due to their, strong affiliation with the positivist techniques of creating an objective history and all, I am not saying that, criticism is bad. I am not saying that textual analysis is bad. Everything is good. At the same time, you have to think about the possibilities. I want to emphasize that the possibilities of the creation of knowledge within certain conditions. So this is the archaeology of history of Foucault, and this is the archaeology of cinema of Foucault. Thank you.